You know, it's funny, isn't it? We're practically drowning in data these days, but actually making sense of it all, finding those real nuggets of insight, that's the tricky part.
It really is.
So that's what we're diving deep into today, graph analytics.
Okay.
It's changing how we understand information in a big way. And it's not just for the techies, believe me.
Yeah.
We're talking catching serious fraudsters, even uncovering hidden investment opportunities. And to help us navigate this world, we've got an expert who doesn't just talk the talk, but actually puts this cutting-edge tech to work.
Yeah.
From helping banks recover billions lost to fraud, to advising the government itself during the COVID crisis, you could say our guest today is a bit of a pioneer. Welcome to the deep dive.
It's great to be here. Yeah, there's really nothing like seeing that aha moment when someone realizes what their data can really tell them.
So true. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's set the stage a bit. For those who are new to this, could you explain what graph analytics is all about? What makes it different from, traditional data analysis?
Well, at its core, graph analytics is about understanding relationships, connections. See, traditional data analysis, it often treats data points as if they're all separate, like rows in a spreadsheet.
Right.
But the real world, well, everything's connected.
Of course, yeah.
And graph analytics lets us map these connections out so we can see that intricate web of relationships that actually drive the patterns, the behaviors we see in the data.
So it's not just looking at individual pieces of data, but about seeing that whole network, the connections that tell the real story.
Precisely. It's like the difference between looking at a list of ingredients and, actually understanding the flavors and textures you get when they all come together in a gourmet dish.
Okay, yeah.
Graph analytics, it gives you the recipe. It shows you the how and the why behind the data.
I love that analogy. Now, I know you work with a company called Eastridge Analytics, and their mission statement really caught my eye. They talk about empowering businesses to unlock insights through expert graph data solutions, driving informed decisions and strategic growth. It's not just about crunching numbers. It's about actually using those insights to make a real difference. Could you tell us a bit more about how Eastridge puts this into practice?
Absolutely. So at Eastridge, we specialize in helping businesses harness the power of graph databases like Neo4j.
Okay.
We use these tools to uncover those hidden patterns, those emerging trends, really just to get a deeper understanding of their data. We've even helped uncover billions in bank fraud and even put some COVID fraudsters behind bars.
Wow, those are some pretty high-stakes examples.
Yeah.
Could you walk us through how graph analytics played a role in those cases?
Sure. So let's take bank fraud. Traditional methods, they often focus on individual transactions,
Right.
looking for those anomalies that just scream fraud.
Right.
But sophisticated fraudsters, they're not that simple.
Of course not, yeah.
They operate in networks, using multiple accounts, shell companies, even seemingly unconnected individuals to try and hide what they're doing.
Making it really hard to track.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not just about one suspicious transaction. It's about seeing that whole web of connections to expose the fraudsters who are working together, even if they're spread across the globe.
It's like in those crime dramas where detectives use a big board with photos and red string to map out a conspiracy.
It's a great way to put it.
It's visualizing those connections.
Exactly. Graph analytics does the same thing, but on a much larger and more complex scale.
Incredible. So it's like giving businesses and law enforcement a whole new weapon to fight fraud. But I understand it's not just about catching the bad guys. You've also used this to help companies find those diamond-in-the-rough opportunities, right?
That's right. For example, we worked with a private equity firm that was struggling to find promising investments.
Yeah.
The market was just saturated.
Right.
So we used graph analytics to map out the entire investment ecosystem. Investors, companies, industries, even patents, everything.
The whole picture.
And we were able to identify a small company with massive potential that traditional analysis had completely missed.
Wow. So it's like you're not just looking at a company's financials in isolation. You're seeing its place in this complex web of relationships.
Exactly. This company, they had a unique combination of technologies and partnerships that really positioned them for explosive growth, and it had gone totally unnoticed.
Wow.
That deal alone resulted in a huge return on their investment, all thanks to seeing those crucial connections.
That's amazing. Now, I have to admit, this whole graph database thing, I need a little help wrapping my head around it. It sounds incredibly complicated.
I get that. It sounds intimidating, but the idea itself is actually pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Imagine a traditional database, like a spreadsheet, with your rows and columns.
Right.
Great for organizing information, but when it comes to capturing the nuances of relationships, Not so much.
Like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah.
You can force it, but
Exactly. Yeah. Now imagine a 3D web where each dot is a piece of data, and the lines between them, those are the relationships. That's essentially what a graph database is. It lets us store and analyze data in a way that reflects how interconnected the real world really is. Neo4j, which is the platform we specialize in, that's a prime example of this technology.
so instead of forcing our data into these rigid rows and columns, we're weaving it into this dynamic, interconnected web that actually reflects how the world works. That's a pretty powerful shift in perspective. But I imagine some of our listeners might be thinking, this all sounds amazing, but is this just for, the tech giants out there with massive budgets? Can businesses of all sizes really benefit from graph analytics?
That's a really common misconception. Graph analytics, it's not just for the Fortune 500. In fact, it can be incredibly valuable for businesses of all sizes, even those without huge data sets.
Okay.
Think about like a local bookstore,
Uh-huh.
trying to compete with those online giants. They might not have millions of customers, but they've got valuable data about their local community.
Yeah. Right. Their preferences, their connections.
Their buying habits.
Exactly. And by applying graph analytics to that data, they can personalize recommendations, maybe identify some potential partnerships within the community, even optimize their events based on customer interests and relationships.
So it's not about the size of the data, it's about the power of those connections.
Exactly.
Finding those hidden gems of insight that can give you an edge no matter who you are. And I imagine with the rise of cloud-based solutions like Neo4j, it's easier than ever to get started, right? You don't need a whole server farm just to dip your toes in.
Absolutely. The barrier to entry is lower than ever before. You can access really powerful graph database technology on demand and scale up as you need to.
That's fantastic. It's democratizing this kind of sophisticated data analysis, giving even the little guys a fighting chance. Now, we've talked a lot about the positive applications, like finding opportunities, boosting profits.
Right. But let's flip the script for a second. Can you talk a bit about how this technology can help mitigate risks, prevent losses, essentially save businesses from potential disasters?
Of course, risk management is another critical area where graph analytics is making a big impact.
Yeah.
Take supply chains, for example.
Right.
We've seen recently how vulnerable they can be to disruption.
Very much so.
If you map out the entire supply chain as a graph, companies can identify potential bottlenecks, single points of failure, even predict how disruptions might ripple through the system. Imagine a manufacturer who relies on one specific component from a single supplier.
Okay. Yeah.
Traditional analysis might miss that vulnerability,
Right.
but a graph-based approach, it would flag that risk immediately.
Okay.
The company could then diversify their sourcing or implement contingency plans.
So it's like having a crystal ball, but instead of predicting the future, you're identifying those risks before they become major problems.
Precisely. And this proactive approach, it applies to so many areas: cybersecurity, compliance, even understanding and mitigating the spread of misinformation online. It's about anticipating challenges and having the foresight to deal with them effectively.
It's fascinating stuff. We've only just scratched the surface of what's possible with this technology. But I imagine with all this potential, there's got to be a certain level of complexity, too. For business leaders who are keen to explore this, what are some of the first steps they should be taking? Where do they even begin?
That's a great question, and you're right. It can seem daunting at first.
Right.
A common mistake is jumping into the technology without really understanding the problems you're trying to solve.
So it's not about having the shiniest new tool, it's about knowing how to use it.
Exactly. I always tell businesses, start by defining your goals and challenges clearly. What questions do you absolutely need answered? What insights would make the biggest impact?
Align the technology with your objectives. Make sure it's not just a shiny object, but a tool that drives real results.
Absolutely. Once you have a firm grasp on your goals, then you can start figuring out how graph analytics can get you there.
That makes sense. But for those who are completely new to this, bridging that gap between, ambition and action, that can still feel like a pretty big leap. What role do companies like Eastridge play in, guiding businesses on that journey?
That's where partnering with a company like Eastridge can be incredibly valuable. We specialize in guiding businesses through every single step, from figuring out their specific needs and goals to designing, implementing, and supporting those tailored graph analytics solutions.
So you're like that trusted guide, someone who speaks the language of both business and graph technology, helping to navigate this exciting but complex terrain.
Precisely. We're the translators, bridging the gap between those technical complexities and real, tangible business value.
So it sounds like Eastridge really helps bridge that gap, taking some of the mystery out of this whole graph analytics thing and making it, accessible and actionable for anyone, no matter what size business they're running. So for our listeners who are intrigued and want to find out more, maybe even take those first steps, what's the best way for them to connect with Eastridge Analytics?
Well, our website is a great place to start. We've got tons of resources there.
Okay.
Case studies showing how it's being used in the real world,
Yep.
blog posts that break down those complex concepts into something a bit easier to digest.
Right.
We even have a quiz to help businesses see if graph analytics is a good fit for them.
I do love a good quiz. But I imagine nothing beats an actual conversation to really dig into the specifics, right?
You're absolutely right. We offer free consultations to talk through individual needs, explore how graph analytics can help achieve those specific goals.
Okay.
No pressure, just a chance to connect with our team and get a better understanding of what's possible.
A conversation with the experts, totally free. Can't beat that. We'll be sure to include all the relevant links in the show notes. Now, before we wrap up, one last question for you. You've dedicated your career to this world of connections, seen firsthand how graph analytics can transform businesses, even entire industries. What's the most rewarding part of it all for you? What gets you excited to dive into the data every day?
It might sound cheesy, but it really is those aha moments.
Yeah.
When you see that light bulb go off for a client when they finally get it. The implications of those connections in their data, that's what makes it all worthwhile. It's about empowering people to see their businesses, their challenges, even the world in a whole new light. To see those hidden patterns, those possibilities that traditional approaches just miss.
It's like you're giving them the key to unlock this hidden dimension where connections hold the key to innovation, efficiency, growth, all of it.
That is a great way to put it.
It's a whole new world out there.
And the exciting part is we're still just scratching the surface of what's possible with this technology. The potential is pretty much limitless. And to be at the forefront of that, it's incredibly exciting.
It's like we've been looking at the world in 2 dimensions, and graph analytics is giving us that 3rd dimension, that depth and complexity we've been missing. Well, folks, there you have it, a deep dive into the fascinating world of graph analytics, with insights from a true expert. I don't know about you, but my mind is racing with ideas right now. Remember, this isn't just about numbers, it's about making those connections, uncovering the patterns that drive success in today's world. We encourage you to check out the resources we mentioned and think about how graph analytics might unlock some hidden potential in your own data. Until next time, keep asking those questions, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep diving deep.